Hello everyone, in this video we'll learn about the events and script of physical collision. As mentioned in the previous overview video, developers can implement logical interactions in code based on physical collision events. The layer engine triggers these specific physics event methods when a physical collision first occurs, continues, and exits. This video will only cover 2D physics events. These methods do not contain specific implementations by default in the engine and can be considered as methods to be overridden by developers. Developers only need to extend from the Leia script class and override these methods within it to implement custom logical responses, replacing the default empty implementations. In this way, by overriding these specific methods, developers can execute corresponding game logic or interactive effects according to the specific stages of physical collision, making the game or application respond more naturally and realistically when encountering physical collisions. Let's now introduce these physics event virtual methods one by one. First is onTriggerEnter, which is an event method called once by the engine at the start of each physical collision. The first parameter other represents information about the collider and node of the collision target object. The second parameter self represents information about one's own collider and node. And the third parameter contact is usually not used, so we won't explain it in detail here. In game development, this method can be used to add logic such as taking damage when hitting a bomb or recovering health when hitting a medicine box. Let's look at a practical application. Sprite 1 and Sprite 2 are two rectangular colliders, with tags matching their node names. Add a script component to Sprite 1, double-click to open it, and add the following code in onTriggerEnter. Since the script is added to Sprite 1, self is Sprite 1, and other is the other rigid body. If it collides with Sprite 2, it prints the log Sprite 1 collided with Sprite 2. This example is relatively simple. There's only one other in the scene. If there were other rigid bodies, they could be placed in subsequent conditional judgments. Let's run and see the effect. Pay attention to the console logs. When Sprite 1 and Sprite 2 start colliding, onTriggerEnter is executed, printing Sprite 1 collided with Sprite 2. OnTriggerStay is an event method called every frame during a continuous physical collision, that is, from the second collision to just before the collision ends in the collision lifecycle. In actual development, OnTriggerStay should be used as little as possible because if used improperly, it can significantly impact performance. The meaning of this method's parameters is the same as before, so we won't repeat it. In game development, this method can be used to add logic such as causing continuous damage from sustained attacks. Continuing from the previous example, add onTriggerStay to the script. If Sprite 1 and Sprite 2 collide and maintain the collision state, it prints Sprite 1 and Sprite 2 continue to collide. Similarly, if there were other rigid bodies, they could be placed in subsequent conditional judgments. Let's run and see the effect. Pay attention to the console logs. When Sprite 1 and Sprite 2 start colliding, onTriggerEnter is executed, then onTriggerStay is continuously executed during the collision. You can see that the log is constantly printing during the continuous collision until the two stop colliding. Finally, there's onTriggerExit, which is an event method called once by the engine at the end of each physical collision. Similarly, its parameter properties are the same. In game development, this method can be used to add logic such as triggering rewards when leaving a poison gas area. Let's look at an example directly. Add onTriggerExit to the script. If the collision between Sprite 1 and Sprite 2 ends, it prints Sprite 1 leaves Sprite 2. If there were other rigid bodies, they could be placed in subsequent conditional judgments. Let's run and see the effect. Pay attention to the console logs. The first two processes executed onTriggerEnter and onTriggerStay, and after the collision ended, onTriggerExit was executed. There's a special case that needs to be introduced for onTriggerStay. For example, in this scene, Sprite 1 is a box collider, Sprite 2 is a circular collider with the sensor property checked, and the script is added to Sprite 1. At this time, when the collision starts, onTriggerEnter is executed, printing Sprite 1 collided with Sprite 2. But during the continuous collision process, onTriggerStay is not triggered, only onTriggerExit is triggered at the end. This is because Box2D does not support continuous collision events for sensors. Developers can think about it. Not supporting continuous collision for sensors is reasonable because when using sensors, objects will pass through directly. If continuous collision were used at this time, it would inevitably consume a lot of performance. It's completely possible to determine that an object is passing through the collision area by using intercollision and exit collision events. That's all for this section. Thank you everyone.